Hello dear viewers, this is George from Ireland and I'm carrying on my assessment of the Northern Ireland Troubles. So the Troubles arguably ended in 97 with the second provisional IRA ceasefire, or indeed could be the Good Friday Agreement of 98, but they rumbled on, people were occasionally killed. Now, there's some level of violence in any country, and Northern Ireland is no exception. So some of these slayings are related to ethnic or religious hatred, to people's political opinions, and that was one of the myths propagated by the Republican movement. But because they were politically actuated, therefore it was permissible and moral. Now, in the Republic of Ireland, if a member of Fine Gael machine guns the Fianna Fáil front bench, that might be politically motivated, but is still murder. Or indeed a member of the Labour Party kills someone who's in the Green Party. If they're doing it for political reasons, it's still murder. But there we are. So going back to some of the root causes of the Troubles, obviously there was irredentism. The Republic of Ireland and its predecessor states had repeatedly accepted partition when the treaty was signed in 1921, which was then ratified by Dáil Éireann, every single member of whom was a Sinn Féiner. And then an election upheld that result, about 75% of people in the south of Ireland voting for the agreement. So despite all that, successive Irish governments being perfidious, they repeatedly welched the deal and then claimed Northern Ireland anyway. There are more examples, often signing agreements with the United Kingdom, which called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So many de jure and indeed de facto acceptances of that. You know, when Northern Ireland was twice publicly offered to the Irish Free State, or just ERA, as one might say, during the Second World War, De Valera turned it down flat, and on and on. So I don't want to go too much into the background. But Stormont governments were unimaginative, and they did nothing to reduce sectarian animus. Take Sir Basil Brooke when he was Minister of Agriculture in about 1930. He allegedly told an Orange meeting, insofar as possible, employ Protestant lads and lassies. I have not one Catholic about the place. Now, don't believe everything you get in the newspapers. He might have been misquoted. But anyway, it wasn't disputed. He was later Prime Minister of Northern Ireland as Viscount Brookborough. Things like that. Now, job discrimination is a worldwide problem, and it does not excuse killing anybody. No one's ever killed their way into passing a job interview. And the so-called discrimination, it was partly because many Catholics were nationalists. Some didn't recognise the state at all, some gave only partial recognition, and therefore rejected job opportunities in the state, or not during the RUC, for example, or the B Specials or the British Army, or other employers gave preference to those who previously served in the British military. Now, of course, there were Catholics, including those of nationalist views, who volunteered for the British Armed Forces, and occasionally they too were discriminated against. People take Harland and Wolff, the big ship manufacturer in Belfast, say, oh, the workforce is overwhelmingly Protestant, but did Catholics apply for these jobs, and in what numbers? There's no conscription into working for Harland and Wolff. They can't take people who don't apply, and how much did people apply? Now, some people might have been feeling uncomfortable about applying because there were many outspoken loyalists there, or some loyalist thugs had attacked Catholics who were working there in the 20s, things like that. Another thing is, I should have mentioned, by the 80s the poppy issue came to the fore. A red poppy is worn on the lapel, the left-hand side of the chest, around November, lead up to the 11th of November for Remembrance Day, the end of the First World War. That's what it's commemorating. So Unionists will very often wear this, nationalists usually not, because it's commemorating all the servicemen, servicewomen of the British military who died or were wounded from the First World War on, and includes the Troubles. So nationalists often took exception to that. Republicans took vehement exception to that, and they were often wearing Easter lilies because of the Easter Rising. So that was the 24th of April 1916, but Easter Monday, whenever it should happen to fall, whether in March or whether in April, Republicans are wearing their Easter lilies and wanting to wear these at work and saying, you can't wear poppies at work because that's sectarian or pro-unionist or something like that. So that was another issue that was raised in the mid-80s. So, as I say, root cause are partly into irredentism, partly sectarianism in both directions. There was anti-Protestant discrimination as well. Not as much, perhaps because Catholics were a majority in Ireland, so feel more secure in our position. Or certainly in the north, although we were maybe 35% of the population at the beginning, we didn't have 35% of the wealth. We were not often employers. And nationalist councils seldom gave houses to Protestant families. And let me see, what else? Bernadette Devlin in her book, The Price of My Soul, even says this. There was anti-Protestant sentiment and discrimination. There just is less opportunity to discriminate, as we seldom had power over them. And maybe I'm falling into this mindset myself by saying we, because I'm nominally a Catholic, although I'm from the South, and try to identify people just because I happen to have been baptised in the same sort of church. I remember someone saying this to me, about how can you not be against the security forces when 14 Catholics were shot dead that day, as though I should necessarily identify with people because I happen to be in the same denomination with them. I identify with them more so than people of another religious denomination, a religion I don't even believe in, but it's a quasi-ethnic label. Sinn Fein was obviously like this as well. I was perhaps the only unionist who in the late 90s was a regular reader of Unpublished, which is Sinn Fein's newspaper. And there was a Holy Cross dispute, Holy Cross primary school, where little girls were going there, and supposedly some of their parents were in the IRA, and some loyalists were protesting outside the school, badgering the parents and indeed the pupils. And Unpublished wrote, "It's terrible that nationalist pupils aged 4 years old are subjected to such verbal abuse." Nationalist pupils? How on earth do they know if a 4-year-old is a nationalist or a unionist or has any political outlook? It was a religious label they were given to these children because they were going to a Catholic school. It was simply assumed that they were nationalist. You just don't know. Call people nationalist if they really are nationalist, and more people are neutral. Perhaps one of the heartening signs towards the end of the trouble is people being indifferent, is not having an outspoken national identity. And another growing group of people in Northern Ireland was those who don't identify with any religious denomination. And more people born to what were called mixed marriages. And that was getting on for about 2% of marriages by the end of the Troubles. I know a chap, his parents were from Tyrone, and they were from different religious communities, and they left in the early 70s, partly because of the Troubles. But as you can imagine, it put them in an awkward position, marrying someone of the opposite religious denomination. So other problems, NICRA, they had a fair point about some things. Bill Craig was unreasonable in banning their marches and accusing them of violence. There wasn't very much violence from them. Admittedly, one of the triumvirate running NICRA was a senior figure in the IRA. Can't remember his name right now. So O'Neill's policy should have been allowed to go on and bear fruit. And this is what caused the Troubles, this long overdue reform process being scuppered by Paisley and so on. I met this British Army interrogator who'd been there in the 70s, and he said, well, things to improve the security situation is we've got to have no sectarian discrimination, Paisley needs to be killed, and I can't think what else he said. And I knew a man who was Irish but grew up in England, and his father had been in the British Army indeed. Let's call him Walter. And he joined the IRA in the mid-60s when there was no conflict going on, and was going into Cork to Tom Ash Hall and so on, and thinking he was very tough and a soldier, but actually very obese, never took exercise. And a young man had insulted him and his IRA jokers in a pub, calling them morons, and the other two IRA guys wanted to beat up this young man, but Walter persuaded them not to. Walter moved to the United States just as the Troubles were breaking out, and he was certainly disseminating the Republican gospel there. I don't know if he's doing anything worse, like sending weapons, but he grew disillusioned with it, that it wasn't going anywhere, it was killing lots of innocent people, and maybe the situation wasn't that bad, although that bomb at Frizzles, where they tried to kill a leading loyalist, I heard it was Gusting Spence, but they killed about 10 civilians. He tried to justify that. I remember meeting another Irish-American there in about 96, and he went to the North sometimes and said how he'd been there in the early days of the Troubles and walking around, and people said, "Who are you?" and he explained the situation. The IRA took him in and showed him around, and he was very sympathetic to them. At one time he was in the house when the British Army came to search it, and he was outraged that they should insist that he stay there whilst they searched the house for arms, saying, "I'm an American citizen, let me out." But they said, well, no, you're here in our country, the UK, that's it. If a foreigner was in the United States when a search was being carried out, the foreigner wouldn't be allowed out simply because he was a citizen of another country. This gentleman was very conceited because of his nationality. Anyway, and no harm was done. I remember him trying to persuade me that the Republican cause, showing me a plastic bullet. Of course, in the United States, police use real bullets on people, unarmed people, an awful lot. But he didn't seem to object to that. So causes, what I was trying to demonstrate is the way that IRA propaganda was spread in the United States, making the situation actually much more worse than it is, and often people really had no idea, but not a large number of people were killed. The security forces really weren't too bad. Now, everyone deserves the presumption of innocence, and that includes the security forces. I don't assume that all accusations against them are bogus. In the armies, there will be some people who are bullies. Even a few psychos will slip through the net, so sometimes they're at least rude to people. verbally abusing them. Occasionally, IRA suspects stopped at checkpoints, were beaten up. And I remember being on the Falls Road in '98, being with a young woman from around there, and she verbally abused some soldiers. And as they're about to drive off in their Land Rover, they spat. They both hit me, actually. I'd said nothing, but they associated me with her. So that would have got to me if I'd grown up around there. So the security forces really weren't too bad after the early days. I know in the early 70s they did kill a few civilians, but by the 90s, almost never. Ideally, it should be absolutely never. The Republicans, if they really wanted to avoid civilian deaths, they could have fought out in the countryside where there weren't people around, not built up areas where people were going to be shot by mistake. Or they could have set off their bombs in the middle of the night in a shop, not during the busiest shopping era. So let me see. Other things, far left figures in Great Britain who gave aid and comfort to the IRA, they're also responsible for this. Yeah, loyalist terrorists, I've talked about them very extensively. So they're heroes like John Hume. Trimble went out on a limb to build peace. So I think I should have to go on into another video, more about Trimble, A Good Man Hung Out to Dry by Tony Blair.